practitioners, students from within and outside of the university space. And it's such an honor and a pleasure for me to be talking to Jaki Seroke, who has done so many things in life, and as a student in the Black radical tradition, it's really an honor to be having this conversation with him. He was part and parcel of a Skotaville Publishers. He was at some point the editor, well, part of the editorial team of Staffrider. I'm sure you all know Staffrider. If you don't, we have some copies, you can go check them out. And also the classic as well, a militant of the PAC, a activist, Robben Island graduate, a poet, a father, a grandfather, someone who's really, really special to us and a fountain of knowledge for us who are really concerned about social change and making a change in this world. So, and of course, I mean, we have about an hour. I've been complaining, we just have an hour. There's a lot to say. I think we'll have him in our seminars at some point to continue these conversations. And by the way, we as Black Praxis, we have seminars. We host seminars each and every month. We have a journal. We have Black community programs to bridge theory and practice. So yeah, at some point we'll have Jaki Seroke with us for the seminars. And so just bear with us. It's just an hour, so we'll try and cover so many things in this short space of time. Jaki Seroke, do you want to open by reading one of your poetry or introducing yourself? Then
let me rather tell my story, because we've been doing storytelling since morning. And then really end up with reading a poem, just to soften you up a bit, because the story is not always nice. The narrative has its own bumps and difficulties. But here is it. I belong to what is called the 1976 generation. These are learners at high school who had a lot of questions about the future, their own future and the future of the country. And we were existing in a political climate, let's call it that. A climate of silence, a culture where we just have to keep quiet, otherwise you'll be in trouble. And here's how it worked. The South African Censorship Board made it very difficult to have reading material available to anyone who wants to know what's going on in the world. And information in all books were not easily accessible. Perhaps expensive, even at the time, but not easily accessible. So a tiny grouping within these townships, particularly in the urban areas of Alex, Tembisa, Soweto, the better part of the East Rand, all these areas. If you had piece of information and knowledge that you could impart that contradicts what you were taught at school, you would be taken seriously. Because the school system itself was based on propaganda and lies. So the teachers were not reliable entities to get information from. And there would always be debates between learners and teachers at the high school level. Until issues that led to the uprisings came about. But it was always a contradiction between young people who were very conventional and wanted us to support the authorities, and rebellious young people at the same time who wanted to speak out and be listened to, be heard. In the township, like it is happening now, there was an underground culture, that's what we call it now. But there was a culture that was not accepted in the churches, in the schools, and so on, where people made up their own songs. Some of the songs questioned the authorities, questioned lifestyle. Some of them depicted a life of sloth. You know, like there would be songs that come from the Shebeen culture, the subculture of Shebeens and so on. In that whole climate, this is how the interest of writing creatively came about, for me certainly, and for some of the people closer to me. This is what we felt we must express ourselves creatively, through poetry, for instance, because poetry was much easier to write. But then when you wrote poetry, you also attracted the attention of the authorities with the contents that you brought. You obviously stepped on the toes of many people who did not appreciate what you're saying. Now, we had an organization called Midupi Writers Association. We read poetry. Poetry was the easy medium to raise consciousness of your audience. We had poetry reading sessions at the high schools. And these poetry reading sessions were also a platform to politicize, make students aware of the Black consciousness philosophy, what it really means. We were not aware, but it became such a powerful medium that in October of 1977, when the uprisings were already there, Midupi was also among the organizations that were banned. It was proscribed, and I was in the middle of it as a youngster, because it was easy. Young people organize each other very easily because they want to follow new trends and so on. But we were intergenerational. There were other established authors. We had authors who were already known. Some had published books. We also had a history of authors in the 60s whose books were banned, and we do not know exactly why, because we had not read those books. So there was an inquisitive mentality to try and get to understand where we come from, what we stand for, so that what we write should also be linked up with what others have written previously. Nadine Gordimer called those type of writers the Black interpreters, because we were living in a world that the world did not know. And the only time they came to understand what was happening is when there's a fire, when there's unrest and uprisings in those communities, but never knew what exactly were the reasons. So creative writers who told their stories or who wrote poetry and so on were very important to listen to, despite the problems of censorship and so on. So we as writers, after the banning, felt that no, you can't ban us. You can't be banned. Our poetry is in the head. And we can perform poetry at any platform. And it can't be banned, because then you have to ban almost every poem we present. So with a group of young authors, would be beginner writers, including some who are established, some journalists and so on, we continued with the poetry reading sessions, but now the numbers were getting smaller and smaller because the harassment by the state was also on a high. But we used these platforms to continue with our writing. And
who were some of the people that you were with at that point in time?
Yeah,
you might know them.
In 1978, a group of of writers came together in Braamfontein to say, we need a platform. Our writing must be published. We had Mike Kirkwood was a lecturer at the University of Natal, and he came with a group of authors from Durban, which included Mafika Gwala and many others who were based in the Durban environment.
Mike Kirkwood, Ravan Press, ne? Was
yes, Ravan Press was owned by Peter Randall, and Peter Randall was banned, was banned and proscribed from entering a publishing or an educational institution. But his Ravan Press was made available for creative writers and to see if we can create a voice after the bannings. So Mike, with writers from Natal, was able to connect with writers from based in Cape Town, James Matthews and others, Peter Clark and others in that area. We had, of course, the Johannesburg writers. We also had writers who had already gone into exile. The Johannesburg writers are basically authors like Siphosi Pamla and many others of that ilk. And then, of course, there were the beginner writers who were not known. Who were not published, who were not really known, but we knew they could perform. We had authors, and I have to explain this. We had writers who could do performance poetry. That's what we called it then. Like Imapele Madingwane, for instance. He would wow the crowds at commemoration services and places like this, performing his now famous poem, epic poem called Black Trial, and the other one, which is also part of that poet, called Africa My Beginning and Africa My Ending. So we had a lot of support, but we did not publish books. So in the early stages of 1978, we organized Staffrider magazine, and we felt that, and I'm referring this to you as an exercise, but we had to decide what do we call this new magazine we're starting, and who are we? And in that workshop and discussion, one of the journalists, Mtoki Mutwati, who was working for The Voice then, said that, look, we are the daredevils. We express ourselves in an unconventional manner, and we do things that other people will say we are meant to do. We are the same as the youngster who jumps across a fence to get into the stadium to watch football, because that was happening at the time. We are the same as the youngster who, instead of traveling and sitting down in a train, they do their tricks, which are called staff. And those tricks entertain crowds. People actually like what they do when they do, but it's also very dangerous because some of them fell victim to train accidents and so on. So we were just like that, because if you ride, you then become a troublemaker for the authorities. So we call the magazine Staffrider, and it gained popularity. In the much of time, I was coordinator of the Staffrider magazine. We were doing proofreading. We had to, I mean, the technology then was a little crude, because we had to paste, cut and paste, copy and make pages, design pages and so on. And we work until late in the evening and get other people to help us, because we didn't have the training to produce a magazine. But we knew the basics. If you write, we could try and proofread your work and so on. Staffrider also had an editorial policy. Because of the issue of censorship, the idea was that writers' groups must edit their own works before they submit them. And I realized there are lots of writers in this group. Writers are very sensitive about their works. They take them very seriously. And you take out one word, he says, you've messed up my work. And you'll get hell. So we allowed the writers to work on manuscript and their submissions to Staffrider must be edited so that we have a page for the guys from Springs, the fellows from Soweto, and so on and so forth. And in that process, many new authors, writers came out. I mean, some of them are famous now. I look at them and say, hey, these guys. I mean, they came in with 2 pieces of paper and said, I have a poem, can it be published? One of them is Matthew Posa. You know, he's one of the famous politicians. I'm not sure what he does, but he's a lawyer as well. The other fellow I think of is, I forget his name, but he's a businessman. He's a top businessman. I think he's the chairman of BUSA or something like that. And he says a lot of philosophy when he talks to people about business right now. But he's one of those who came in writing stories. Some of them were from Wits here. You know, the Staffrider was non-racial. This is the point I want to make. Staffrider accepted contribution from everyone. And we did not really try to cut people off, because then we would be extending the censorship ourselves. So we allowed writers to come in, and we also tried very increasingly to introduce literary merit. Because in the end, if we're going to be creative writers, the work must last over time. It must not just be sociological or report an incident. It must be able to last long. You know, like the stories we were telling here earlier. These are ancient stories, but they're still relevant today. So we needed writing like that. We also had connections with writers in the neighboring countries, in Lesotho, in Botswana, Zimbabwe even. Before 1980, we had connections with writers in Zimbabwe as well. And we tried to create a lively cultural movement that replaced the bannings of the political organization. And we also attracted, by doing that, we attracted police harassment. As a coordinator, I had a lot of books. I was there. So some people would come and say, Eamon, I want to know this. There's something called the Freedom Charter. Do you know about it? I say, yeah, no, I know it. We were Black Consciousness. But I know it. And I would make copies available. I end up getting arrested for that and being charged. I sometimes tell the people, including my friends who are in the ANC, that of all of you, I'm the only one who was arrested for this document with them to reproach. So I know exactly what pain feels with your document, whereas you just sing about it and make a lot of noise. We continued with that. I mean, writers supported each other. We held one major conference at Wits here in 1979, where we tried to bring a gathering of writers, the Sisters, these are writers in Afrikaans, or from the Afrikaans-speaking community of South Africa, who were critical of apartheid laws. You know, Andre Brand, there are a lot of them, and many others. At Wits here, we had a publishing house that was produced by Ampi Cotier. I think he was teaching Afrikaans here at Wits. So we had a lively community of the arts, and Staffrider was a platform for all those writers. If you had a short story, there was a platform for us to publish. Some of the published authors did not have to belong to writers groups. S.T.M. Patlele had returned from exile, and if he wrote a story, obviously it enhanced Staffrider. We produced 3,000 copies of every issue, and our distribution methods were hand-to-hand. And this we did deliberately, because we were able to distribute almost 2,000 or more of those copies within a month, or within 2 weeks. Our rush was 2 weeks, because when you publish a book, you send it to the libraries and so on, and get it to the bookshops and that sort of thing. Before you know it, on Saturday, the second Saturday after the book has been out, it will possibly be banned. So the distribution strategy was to make it a point that the books go out to people. and the hand-to-hand method was very effective. We learned from throughout the world. I mean, we're not just narrow-minded. The Samizdat publications in the Soviet Union by writers who opposed or were in opposition to some of the suppression going on there helped us, because we realized, oh, you can do this. So we learned from other people on how to produce material and have it available to people. So in a true sense, we were some form of staff writers, but we were moving. The train was moving, and we were moving with it. Before we knew it, we had created a second generation of the 80s of people who were now involved in the struggle. And I can tell you now, poetry will not make you go and burn a building in the township, but it will make you realize you have creative powers as well after you've read it. And you can see the world differently, and your opinion matters. So we encourage, through our writings, through our publication, we encourage people to think who could not, because thinking was dangerous, who could not apply their minds on anything, and they just accepted what the authorities were saying. So the spirit of resistance continued with that. I want to sum up the issue of Staffrider, because that's what we felt we should discuss here. Staffrider content in particular was criticized heavily for not being very creative. Some students of literature often said, but this is not right. You know, what is this? And we get a lot of criticism.
Writing what sense, Tom? Proper English?
Yes, the issue would be the English is not good. You know? And there were a lot of problems with the way, it is not literature. You can't classify this as literature, some were saying. And our argument was that there's a different type of literature that sets up a base for the growth of a people's literature. And that literature comes with idioms that are known by those people in that area. There's also a problem with understanding the idiom, because it does not make sense to the proper English speakers. You know? There was I hope they're still there, the English Academy. They're based at Rhodes. You know, they came with this settler mentality, the English settler mentality of, if things are not British and properly structured like they think, then it's not English. So we appropriated the English and made it our own. So we used local idiom. We even infused Tsotsital into the language. And our editorial policy was that, well, like publishers should do, was to understand what the author is coming up with that's fresh, creative, and make a contribution towards our national literature. So we would listen to every author that comes. Some books were successful, others were not, you know. But most of what was not successful is basically because the conventional world did not accept it. We had writers like Mtutu Zeli Machop, he's still around. Mtutu Zeli was such a brilliant author. He, you know, like we were doing storytelling here earlier, he just went around listening to his friends, accompanying them in dealing with their problems in Soweto, whether it is lack of food or problems of unemployment and so on. And he told those stories from a human point of view. And those stories made so much sense. I mean, his collection, we also published this collection in the Staffrider series of books, and it was the first one. It was called Call Me Not a Man. You know? It's a collection of stories. He later wrote another story which did not do well. Not many people know about it. But we had, for instance, a collection of Africa My Beginning, the poetry collection by Ingwapele Madingwa. Both these books were banned. And look, I mean, that's why I say authors or creative writers are not just the nerve center of society. They themselves are very sensitive about these issues. And Tutuzeli Machoba was so hurt when his book was banned that he said this, obviously was not so, but he said this, that I'm not writing anymore. What's the point of writing for myself or writing things? Because we didn't have access to the wider world. If it's banned here, we don't know what happens. We didn't know that the book can be sold across the borders and so on. The same for Ingwapele. So the census, the system really destroyed what was, for me, the layer of black thought or exposure of what's happening in the black country, particularly the period, the 60s, the 70s, well, to some extent even the 80s, because those writers were writing under heavy but negative conditions. They were harassed, they were taking risks with their lives, and the issue was that you would end up exposing yourself to police harassment just for having ideas, creative thoughts, and writing them down. All during this whole period, I was editor. Ravan Press took me through workshops. Of course, I told you Mike was a senior lecturer at the University of Natal, so we dealt with manuscript on a regular basis. Dealing with manuscript, they put me through that. We held workshop almost every Saturday. So I'm from the University of the Streets, where these things are matched with reality, or matched with these things. So we took this very seriously. We also had workshops. We began to make workshops with beginner writers, because we felt if we're going to get to the next level, beginner writers must understand literary devices. They must understand the meaning of your writing and making it acceptable to a wider audience. We're beginning to talk about these devices as a medium and also as part of the writing skills. So we held workshops. We held workshops, largely conducted by university lecturers who made outreach programs. One of them was Njabule Ndebele. He wrote stories. He's from the 70s generation. He came here. Siposi Pamela obviously also led to the emergence of FUBA, where a range of arts was being taught and formalized. But we focused largely on the works of the teachings of Estienne Patel. Patel wrote a collection of short stories, Down Second Avenue. Not many of you have read it, but I recommend you read it, because he's an expert on how to write a short story, how to really, how did he put it, condense your work in such a way that in 2,000, 3,000 words, you set your short story. Don't be all over the place. So we had lectures like that.
Was he Wits at that point in time?
He was at Wits. He was doing, what do we call it?
Comparative
literature. But he was able to spend his weekends with young authors. The only frustration was that we found that some of the beginner writers were not reading. They were not reading. I mean, they just, the amenities like libraries in the townships were not there. So access to books was not there. So we would spend 5 years and not produce a single novel. We're really upset about it, because it means we're not doing things well. But the problem were that the education, the overlap of Bantu education into our communities are very strong. So people could not express themselves, or could not focus, concentrate, and know how to produce a book. If you write a book, this is my last point. If you write a book, you must have a beginning and an end of writing, not of the content. You must be able to say, in 90 days I'll have this book done, and I'll have 60, 70,000 words. If you don't do that, you won't write a book. Because you write stop and never do it and come with all excuses. We all have excuses, but you never produce a book. But if you're a writer and hope to write your works, in this business, you must concentrate and give it focus. This is what we learned over the years. And I think my discussion with you is largely that there is such a thing as, well, we used to call it black literature, black creative. No. When I say we used to call it, it was very strong among us. We also had people criticizing among us as a debate society, but who were saying writing is writing. But I'm still one of those who think that, look, you offer an experience that nobody else has had. You offer, and that is how dialogue in the world works. That experience must be expressed without any suppression or trying to make us what we are not. So that we can stand up tall and say, this is our story and we can identify with it. And we are doing this for our readership. I mean, if you go to Soweto, houses in Soweto, well, I would say in Alex, but Alex is not a good example. If you go to Deep Blue in Soweto, all those people, the black middle class, they don't even have libraries. It means they still don't read. So for us, the idea is write something that will catch their interest so that they read. I'm happy that younger writers today are doing that. They write prolifically they're prolific writers on their own experiences, and they use these methods. That's because they have access to education that we had at the time, and they can express themselves. There's no censorship. The country allows us to talk as much as we want. So there is a need to read their works, to understand that, and to interact with each other with a better understanding than it was before. That's the end of my talk.
And before Staffrider, Sipho Pamela was already working on the classic. I mean, Net Nakasa started the classic in the 60s, and I think in 71 it sort of died down. Pamela, I think about 75, started editing the new classic together with a small theater publication called Sketch. And I know that at some point you were, there's an editorial here by you. So how did you get involved with the classic?
Yeah. Look, writing, the skills of writing work better when you have a mentor. They work better when you look up to some writer to help you with your script and what you're writing. Under normal circumstances, if you write and you have a manuscript, you give it to another author who's well-versed and they give you their comments behind it. So we looked up to published authors like Sipho Pamela in particular, because he was in the country. The others were like Wali, Seroke had gone to exile, and lots of other problems that were happening. But Sipho Pamela, less is said about him, and I don't understand why that is so. But he wrote poetry that depicted the township so well in the 70s. I mean, I remember he wrote a poem about the peach tree. And this was a strong, all the township houses had a peach tree somewhere. And he wrote about that, and you never forget that poem. So we looked up to him. I came across him. I was also a student activist. I was a club choir. So, club choir. Where we threw stones.
Yeah.
So that generation, that's what we were called, because we fought with stones, you know. So one of my classmates had been detained and Sepamla as a poet, we knew he was writing poetry as well. As a poet, he came to our high school to talk to them. When this fellow was released, we talked to him about solitary confinement and so on and so forth. And we were that's the guy who wrote the book. You know, it was so interesting to meet someone who has written a book and touch their hand, you know, at the time. And Sipamla was one of those. So we started a connection from then onwards. So as my writings...
And when is that, do you remember?
Yeah, in 1976. So we created a bond, a relationship with Sipamla. I write about it in my memoirs, but I'm just saying Sipamla then brought in the politics of publishing and said to us that, look guys, I know you publish books with Ravan Press, but you don't own Ravan Press. Huh? And you call yourself Black Conscious. He criticized us and made us feel guilty that he's actually right. And he said, I've struggled to produce a magazine called The New Classic. I've never really had enough funding. You get funding because you work with whites. You know? And it would be far much better if you can establish your own publishing house, establish your own magazine, express your own voice, like we all say, you know. And there's nothing wrong. No, it shouldn't be because you want to help other people. It should be because you want to communicate. So he then handed over the classic to us to continue with it, and obviously, and also maintain his subscription list. There were many other people who subscribed there. So Sepamla became a kind of godfather for most of the young people who were writing around 1976. We all looked up to him.
But when was it? When did he hand over the classic? And why, in fact? Because this is 1984. Yeah, this is
no. I'll tell you. He gave us this in 1982. There are editions that come before what you have there.
Yeah.
We then had. This was also helping us. The classic was more sophisticated. It wanted you to write poetry that is real poetry, you know, not some sloganeering. And we felt, okay, let's use the platform of the classic to do that. So he was at FUBA when he gave us the rights to publish the classic, and we tried to do that for a better part of the 80s. I'm just saying that the writers, even around Sepamla, most of the writers who are established. Early this morning they were talking about Gina Mhlophe. Gina was not, she had a passion for writing. And she was not really trained, and she felt she was a domestic worker. I don't quite remember where this was, in Berea somewhere. And she felt, she came with a story and said, hey, I wrote this story when I was in the toilet. And really said the story of her frustrations with her work and her life. And we looked at it and published the story, you know. And then from then onwards, she felt, no, you guys write this tough thing about the Boers and so on. No. I want to write children's stories. Why don't you write children's stories? Because children are, well, especially what today we call early learning development. She focused on that, and because she still is, powerful storyteller. She would tell these stories. One time I went with her to a school, I think it's called Robben something, in Santin here. And it was an all-white class. And she told her story. You know, the kids were so happy. No, of course, she told the story, it's folklore stories, but she told them in English, obviously, but using, interspersing that with Zulu idioms and words and so on, and she would explain what it means. And she captivated. I looked at that and said, you know, you're up to something. Well, she's famous for that, and she has worked with many others, as you've heard. So this experience of community writing, because that's what we were doing, helped uplift others. It helped put others into focus, shape their writings, and so on. So it has really helped.
Yeah. And would you say there's clearly a difference in the aesthetics, Staffrider and the classic, where the different aesthetics, different ideas on language and how to present your work, and where they different in that sense, or it was the same, or it was a continuation of some sort when you move from Staffrider to the classic?
Well, I always take it as a development. I mean, we couldn't be static at one place. You know, the Staffrider, and I'm using this as an example. In Staffrider, you could write a poem about anything, and we take it, it's a poem. I remember one fellow wrote a poem, What's Happening? Henry Kissinger. He mentioned things that were happening in the news and said, what's happening? It's 3 stanzas, but it was so loaded with information because it mentioned what's happening everywhere else in the world. June 16, kids detained, what's happening? And it was a poem. So, and we were saying with poetry, don't try to be too sophisticated. And try to be something you are not. Just allow your creativity to take hold, and say it. And it must not even be big words, Just say it. So that's what we did with stuff. I mean, another fellow would say, we live in the world of numbers. Digit 1, detention. Digit 2, exile. Digit 3, dead in detention. Digit 5, no food in the house. I mean, it doesn't sound like poetry. But we allow that to be an expression of poetry, and we publish that. This is what happened in Staffrider. In some instances, it worked. In some instances, it didn't. But when we went into the classic, we were trying to be a little more polished. And I'm not sure if it worked, but I'm not sure really, because I mean the creative writings are something else. But of course we encourage people to express themselves in a manner in which they will talk to communities far and wide. And a new phenomenon came because in the days of the Staffrider, we did this for free. At the classic, and I was the editor of the classic, people would say, Eman, I gave you 2 of my poems. When are you paying me? So the culture and the development meant too many things as we went forward.
Yeah. So when I read, I'll read it so in closing. The book is available right there, by the way.
Yeah, I wrote a poem. I have to read because I'm not those performance poems. This one was written in 1977 and it's called Era. Some were engathered with a canopy of remorse. Some among us cried like crocodiles. Some listened to the hokam of instigators and tomato sauce. Some licked their fingers after a clash at the burned bridges. Others immediately dumped everything. Another slipped down with a knife. Other faces went stony in toilet's eye. Yet another preferred to box. This our people's man. I wrote like the Japanese or the Chinese, small poems. I'm going to read another one. Oh yeah. Testimony. Can we carry the burden and the joy of saying the true name of each thing? Are we capable to be the arbiter of all that is just and irreversible? Or do we soak our hands with pomp in thin waters to drip dry in sunny complacency, barreled into silence? Are we able to bear testimony against the scourge of racism, pillage, deceit, against this man from nowhere who lacerate our lives and render our children the world's imbecile, disinherited?
That's one.
One more. Okay, this is, I suppose, more relevant to the times. The child did not return. The child did not return from school down the road. The child was last seen at 10 in the morning through a hole in the rotten corrugated iron. Another school child saw the child slip into the pit latrine, desperately crying for help, raising the right hand, falling face down into the faces. The child did not return from an aimless walk playing with an imaginary friend in the Cape Flats. They went across the waste ground, but the ugly red-eyed ogre on 2 human legs thought it best to whisk the child away. The child did not return from the long journey to find the baby's mama. They alighted the train at Park Station. The grandmother said, "The child was here now. The whereabouts of the child are not known. Are not known." The child vanished just like that. The child did not return. The child was no more. The heart was savagely ripped off. Tears of the whole village could not run dry, and the future of their children was a big letdown, flaking out in the sand, blowing in the wind without the child.
We take questions. We have 5 more minutes left. Yeah.
Just an enormous thank you. And I don't know if it's as much as a question as a comment, but I frequently read Staffrider. It's a journal I go back to again and again. And one of the things that amazes me about it is how innovative it was. I mean, there's work in there that I look at us now and I go, often I read pieces in Staffrider and I go, we're nowhere, and I become aware of how much we're self-censoring now. And while you had no freedom, we who have every freedom have become so constrained by the market and those that censor, that I sometimes think that we have so much to learn from your generation, and that Staffrider needs to just be reprinted on whole so that we can see the kind of bravery, and I'm not just speaking about political content, I'm speaking about formally inventive pieces that were breaking new ground. And I don't see that in our literature today as much as I saw it in Staffrider. So I think we need to reprint the whole series. And I think we should try and talk and get Wits to somehow get us a reprint of everything from Staffrider and get it back on the streets, because we're forgetting that history and we've become enfeebled by capitalism, to the point where we don't take the risks you guys were taking, and we don't trailblaze and we don't invent new forms. There's stuff in Staffrider that you would never get published today because it's too wild. And we need that spirit back. So it's more comment. I don't know if it's a question, it's my comment, but it's a thank you.
No, let me respond to your comment. You know, the publishers now, publishing has become so corporate. It's run by the elites. They make the decisions. The book distribution system is also a closed door approach. If they don't like your book, you won't see it. That's, they hide it somewhere in the bag there. And the promotion is made for writers who are nice teddy bears, or people who are really going to be saying things that are obvious and they don't shake anything. Sometimes very shallow. And sometimes with authors who know nothing about what they're writing about. And these are books that are printed. There are many authors, and I'm not talking only about creative stuff, including books on social topics that really never get to be promoted very well in these bookshops. And I think it's deliberate.
Yeah, agreed.
And well, the other thing is the books are so expensive.
Yes.
Yes, yes. I mean, you have to decide. Food, book, food, book. And it's always a sacrifice that you have to make about this thing. But I wanted to tell you this, that I published a book with Staffrider. Yeah, and this year they told me that, no, this year, anyway, they told me that we're going to pulp your books.
What?
Yeah, and I say, well, why? Why? And they say, no, man, the sale is very slow, we have to recycle. We think we should pulp. And I said, well, they had printed 3,000 copies. They had sold 2,100 and something.
In exclusive books.
Yeah, the book was published during the period of 2021. I mean, we had COVID-19 at the time. So the promotion was not as good as that. But now they decide after a year or two that they're going to pulp the books. Yeah. So I made a deal with them, negotiate. I said, okay, I buy the books, and I'll sell them myself. How much is it? And they told me that a copy of a book, they could, authors get discounted prices. So the book would be sold to me at 35 rands. I said, yeah, these guys are making a killing. If they can sell that book at 35 rands, why is the book not selling at 100 rands? And if we include all other things in the value chain, including distribution, why should it be 300 rands and some enormous amount?
I went to Exclusive Books trying to get them to stock a book, and I said I wanted it sold at 100 rand, so it was affordable. And Exclusive Books said to me, our audience is not price sensitive, so we will put the markup on whatever you sell it to us. I even offered them a reduced rate if they sold it for less. And they said, no, what, we're going to put the markup anyway because our market does not care about price. I mean, the name says it all, Exclusive Books.
Yeah. So we buy books at the second-hand bookstore. At the stores in Johannesburg, the books are, the prices are much better. Okay.
Thank you so much for this, such an enriching discussion, and I've learned so much because I had this idea that the classic stopped. I didn't know, and I'm dying to just immerse myself in this richness that you and I want to learn more about, that because I feel like nowadays we're really looking to people to tell us what to think about quality and how you make those choices, what is how your aesthetics work. And I really think that we need more of you. We need you like on speed dial. I want you on speed dial in this university because our students desperately need your wisdom. Thank you.
You are too kind.
Anyone else? Okay. Yeah, no, thank you so much, Jaki Seroke.